right now, a game made for VR typically takes between 20 to 100,000 USD to develop, and they're typically fairly simple, abbreviated experiences. Half-Life Alyx has won several awards across the board and is arguably the best VR game made so far. Developer Valve hasn't released the financials, but speculation puts the estimate somewhere between $29 and $75 million. How would you like to play a game in VR that's raised almost $600 million? I remember when I got the HTC Vive, which back then was the OG of VR headsets along with the Oculus Rift. I messed with a bunch of VR games that really kind of mounted to VR demos if we're being real, but I wanted a real AAA VR experience, and after I did my Googles, I bought Elite Dangerous and cranked it up. I didn't know what the hell I was doing because I had never played a space sim or anything as complex as Elite, but the moment the tutorial loaded up, I went completely silent. I was in the cockpit of a spaceship in the middle of an asteroid belt, and that was mind-blowing. I looked around and saw my body and the ship controls, a small storage space for a drink or something, and a bit of the outside of the ship, and if I raised my real body up a bit, I could see even more outside the canopy. And right then and there, I knew I would be all about this game for a long, long time. Flying a spaceship in VR felt like the pinnacle of gaming at the time, and it probably still would, except between Elite Dangerous development going all 6s and 7s and dealing with the mountains of cables the Vive required, it was tough to stick with it for years on end. But now that Star Citizen is starting to get through the biggest of the technical barriers and the pace of development is picking up a low steam, a huge infatuation with the idea of experiencing the Star Citizen universe in virtual reality is re-emerging within the community. Sylvan, a senior engine programmer at CIG, has put it out there that he's ready to kick off VR and even said he doesn't know how long it'll take, but as soon as Vulkan is working, he'll implement it, even if he has to do it in his spare time. When somebody's that motivated to get it going, you know it's a question of when and not if. But Star Citizen is a lot different than Elite Dangerous. It's ambitious, it's sexy, it wants to do everything in a super detailed, high fidelity, loud way. So, VR integration, what would that even look like? To start answering that question, let's take a quick look-see at what already exists. Elite Dangerous is second to none as far as VR spaceflight, mainly because the only real competition is No Man's Sky, and as impressive as No Man's Sky's evolution has been, its flight model and execution is more arcade-like, so we'll stick with Elite. If I didn't say it enough in the beginning, flying in VR is the bee's knees for the real OGs. Initially, you sit there with your mouth open because this ship that you've been staring at on a flat screen is suddenly all around you. It's a difficult feeling to translate. It's more significant than seeing a car or even a house online and then actually being inside it, probably because it's a sci-fi set piece that doesn't exist in real life, but here you are, and there's all your controls, and there's your feet, and you never notice how high off the floor they are. And for at least the next 5-10 minutes, that's what you'll be doing, looking around in amazement because it's brand new all over again. You'll notice the difference in the scale of the space that you're in. Flat games on monitors translate everything like a long camera lens that compresses everything together. VR delivers the proper scale of your environment, and it's impossible to show in the video, but when you experience it, it's a sight to behold. After you pull your eyes off your ship interior, you'll be ready to put those thrusters to work. The hangar doors will open and you'll be let loose on the universe. Hopefully you'll be in an area with some traffic coming in and out, because as cool as the interior is, seeing other ships going about their business really glues you into that sticky trap of existing in a futuristic sci-fi continuum. Everything is now physically bigger, and your place in it all will, at least initially, feel smaller. You're just one of many other people in AI, each with their own objectives and jobs. Before you get too deep into your philosophical soliloquy, you might get hit with a little vertigo, especially if you're motion sensitive, but it's not a vomit comet. As you're out there barrel rolling, looping, maybe both at the same time, your brain will be telling your body it's moving, and in the confusion, you might need to log out and take breaks. But it's all good though, even astronauts train for motion sickness. Crybaby. Side note, if you don't have a good old astronaut chair to train with, but you want to be ready for Star Citizen VR, Aircar is a great place to start. Maybe I'll do a vid with some other VR space and flying games later, but Aircar is free, pretty damn cool looking, and it's a tiny taste of flying in VR while you wait on Star Citizen. It's also good for bringing up a point that you might not have considered. To fly your Aircar, you just have the basic controls needed for 6 degrees of freedom style flight, all of which fits on the touch controls or a controller, so you don't have to worry about your mouse and keyboard. keyboard. Star Citizen, on the other hand, we all know that game has enough buttons to feed the needy and more incoming all the time. How do you deal with all that in VR? When I first started Elite, it was my first PC game ever, so I just had a basic mouse and keyboard, and I would have to lift my headset up all the time to find the key I need to press. Super far from an ideal way to play. You can turn on pass-through long enough to take a look, but that's just as bad for killing them immersive vibes. The next best thing is do your best to bind everything you can to a controller. The homie Jules has a vid series called Couch Citizen to help you do that with no compromises. The best options are HOTAs or HOSAs. A lot of HOTAs have a ton of buttons for the copious amount of bindings you need, and even mode toggles, which give buttons different functions for different use cases. But not all of them are sprouting switches and buttons everywhere, are they? If you have something like a T-Flight or even an X52 Pro, you're still gonna have to rely on the keyboard for some things. In that situation, I would suggest having a gamepad on the side, the little single-hand keyboards that you customize. Before my first pair of HOTAs, I used a gamepad with a mouse, and it was all I needed. If you combine the gamepad with any stick or throttle, you'd have more buttons than you needed to keep from removing your headset. It just takes a while to memorize your bindings. That's not to say you can't just use mouse and keyboard, but blindly trying to give your keyboard the reach around looking for the home keys in order to find the other key you need in the middle of playing, it's a little much. After you get all that settled, you'll feel right at home flying your ship. It'll be the same except a way better, way more immersive experience. Being inside of your space whips will give you a renewed sense of ownership of your ships and probably keep you engaged for longer. We've got good comparisons for general flight, but what about when you step out of the pilot chair? That's the question that Elite Dangerous failed to answer. As great an experience as Elite Dangerous is in VR, and as cool and a little bit nauseating Air Car is, your VR legs are still bolted to the deck. So there's a few unknowns out there with how it works in Star Citizen, where you're in and out of the pilot seat all the time. Matter of fact, think about when you're starting a new session. You spawn into a hab, laying on your bed, and the first thing you do is get out of bed. So you hit Y to get up and your body moves, your perspective changes, and your character stands up. So far, so good. Now you walk over to the door to exit the habit. Oh God. What do you mean? Oh God. Alright, some of you will know where I'm going with this, but for everybody else, there's a couple different types of locomotion when you're on foot in VR. There's teleportation, where you point to a spot you want to walk to, click it, and you teleport over to it. Teleportation is easy peasy on the senses, but that's just not going to work for Star Citizen because we can't just have folks teleporting all over the place. I mean, sometimes we do now, but those are desync issues. So we're going to have to rock what's called continuous locomotion. And that's where you push forward or whichever direction, and your character moves in that direction, just like you do right now. The problem with continuous locomotion is that until you build up a good clean tolerance to VR, it is the most foreign shit to your brain that you instantly start feeling queasy. Why? Because you're moving forward, but your body is still. The first time you try it, it feels kind of like being on a skateboard, but your surroundings are coming at you instead of you moving forward into your environment. But like I said, you build up a tolerance to that and it becomes natural. This was just my second time playing this basketball game after a gap of a few months, and moving forward and backwards were just fine. What's not so fun is turning while moving. By default, most VR games are set to snap turn, where you flick the right stick in a direction and your head instantly snaps X amount of degrees in that direction. Star Citizen doesn't have snap turning, so I turned it off in VR, and yeah, you do get dizzy turning, and it's not just a little bit. And you gotta suffer through it for at least a handful of play sessions before you're used to it. And then think about how much faster you're moving, ducking, spinning, and aiming in the verse. There's already fast-paced shooters in VR, so it's doable, but those games have built-in features to keep your guts from bubbling 3 minutes in. A notable one is a vignette. That's a black area surrounding your immediate view to kill or shrink down the surrounding area. I don't know exactly why that works, but it works. I don't imagine folks being too enthused about having their view cut off of Star Citizen, but I do hope this is included with the option to turn it down and then completely off. That way you can get used to things, then take the training wheels off at your own pace. Like with the ships, games that are designed 100% for VR have their controls simplified so that everything can be done with VR controllers, and VR controllers are designed to use natural hand movements and therefore don't have a lot of buttons. In the verse, you need to move in 4 different directions, turn 360 degrees, walk, jog, sprint, jump, crouch, go prone, roll over, peek left and right. use handheld guns and gadgets and all their functions, melee weapons, interact with objects, and a bunch of other stuff I'm forgetting. Which means you'll most definitely be using either a controller, gamepad, or mouse and keyboard, which could be an area of disconnect. Having and seeing your body in VR but controlling it with a keyboard. It works with ships and vehicles, but imagine your real body needing to be moved around with a mouse and keyboard. I can't speak from experience on that one, but I think you can do that with a few games like No Man's Sky, so if you already done it, let us know your experience. As Chris Roberts says, the UI is mostly diegetic. Things you interact with are done in a way that your character themselves would normally interact with them, like picking up a weapon and customizing it while it's in your hand, rather than being taken to a separate inventory screen and customizing it there. Assuming mouse and keyboard FPS play, or if you're a weirdo like your boy, mouse and controller play, assuming those won't be too much of a disconnect and that there won't be too much motion sickness to make folks tap out, the rest should translate fairly well. Where things could get tricky though is with performance. The general consensus for VR is that 60 frames a second is the minimum frame rate for your adventure to be passable as far as comfort. Anything below 60 can cause nausea, disorientation, and discomfort like American medicine. Right now in Star Citizen, you might see frame rates as low as 20 to 30 something frames a sec in an area like Orison that doesn't perform very well, all the way up past 140 frames on the moon or in space. That doesn't mean go spend up your money on a rig while we have no idea how it will perform by the time VR is ready to go, but it's worth your consideration that hardware may be a barrier to entry since you'll need something that can crank out enough performance for a steady experience. And you also have to throw the headset into the equation. That's a whole other video, but starting at $399 USD, the Quest 2 is by far the most widely adopted and one of the most affordable headsets you can get, but its graphical performance is not really what you're looking for when it comes to Star Citizen. To get those crisp visuals you expect, you might need to spend the cost of an $890 jump. Overall, the prospect of Star Citizen in VR sounds like it'll be a beautiful thing that lets you live your best space life on a whole new level, but CIG definitely has a work cut out for them in terms of creating an immersive experience that works with non-VR controls, doing their best to keep you from living in a barf bag paradise, and optimizing the game enough to perform above the minimum VR requirements. However it goes, I'll be there with the coverage. Till then, check out this video for no reason. Fly dirty citizen.